Good morning. My name is Phil Asgian, a member of the Westminster Social Justice Team, and we build the social justice forums around a common theme each program year. Our theme this program year is moving from understanding to transformation, affecting change together, guided by God. Through these forums, we want to explore capabilities we need to build and norms we need to examine in order to be effective transformation partners in our community. Today, we're pleased to welcome Westminster elders Joe Beld and Vince Thomas, who co-chaired the Enduring Hope Capital Campaign Mission Component Team, focused on exploring opportunities to advance justice in our community. Vince is an elder and Westminster's Clerk of Session, and also serves our denomination as commissioner from the Synod of Lakes and Prairies to the General Assembly Permanent Judicial Commission. In his day job, Vince is academic dean at Minneapolis College. Joe is an elder serving on session and chair of the Faith and Action Council. She's also a member of the Westminster Budget Committee and Personnel Committee, supporting our ministers and staff. And in her day job, Joe serves as Vice President for Mission at St. Olaf College in Northfield. We have higher education covered. We have a lot to present today. So for both of you in the room and on live stream, we're going to hold questions until the presentation material is done. And at that time, I'll have a mic for those in the room, and Beth is going to be monitoring the live stream chat for those of you online that wish to submit questions or comments. You can put them in the chat at any time. So with that, please welcome Joe and Vince.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Our objective is to introduce you all to 6 remarkable Twin Cities community organizations, all of whom work to build a more just society by supporting academic development and leadership development for Black and Indigenous children and youth. Westminster has committed to give financial support to these organizations from the proceeds of the Enduring Hope Capital Campaign and to build long-term relationships with these organizations. We also want to tell you the story of how we chose these organizations, because the approach and process we used on our journey, and it was a journey, established a model for Westminster's future social justice collaborations with community partners that is neighbor-centered and that emphasizes listening and responding and aims to be not for others, but with others. So this is about who we chose, how we chose them, and why the process we used will impact faith and action at Westminster going forward. And as I was working on this, finishing this up yesterday, I thought to myself, how very Presbyterian, Vince, to be excited about the process, right, that you use to choose faith and action partners. So here's a roadmap for our presentation. I'm going to present the context in which the mission component team did its work. And then Joe will tell you about the team's journey, and then Joe and I will take turns introducing you to the 6 organizations. And as Phil said, we'll have time for questions at the end. And Joe, if you could just leave this slide up for just a moment. So the mission component is exactly that. It's a component. Specifically, it is one component of a capital campaign launched with a specific fundraising goal and a specific purpose. And the key language on this slide is the language that says, quote, and justice in our city and beyond. So if you remember nothing else, that's where this work fits into the larger context of the campaign. Next slide, please. So as Reverend Tim said in last Sunday's sermon, as people of faith, we are not naive. We know that there are a lot of problems out there. And if you recall, if you were at 10:30, and then as if on cue, the sound of a first responder siren came into the sanctuary and interrupted him. So when the mission component team met to discern which issue Westminster should address with its Enduring Hope campaign mission component, from all of that we're aware of, the team members identified racial and social justice immediately. Next slide, please. And who was on the team? Here's the mission component team roster. Joe will tell you the story of how this group of 9 lay leaders and 1 associate pastor journeyed from, at our first meetings, thinking, this is so large, where do we even start? All the way to, we enthusiastically recommend that Westminster address these 2 needs with these 6 partners. Joe?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I was thinking, there's another session going on, a listening session in relation to the transition that's coming up. And I thought, well, this is we really approached this work as a listening session for more than a year. So I kind of like the symmetry between that. And Phil, I just want to mention what a great fit the theme for this year's Social Justice Forum is with the process that we explored and engaged in over this period of time. So as Vincent said, I'm going to talk with you about how we went about with the vast array of community partners in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area doing fabulous work to lift up the neighbor and to engage structures and systems that create barriers to well-being and flourishing. How in the world were we going to narrow that down? So that part of what was so stimulating and engaging about this process was the opportunity to listen and to learn. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We started by attempting to deepen our understanding of what our community would look like if it were racially just. If that's where we want to go with this mission component, what does that look like? And we thought it was important to start with people who were doing the work of justice within and beyond the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So we spoke with a number of community leaders, many of whom Westminster already knew or were in relationship with. So examples of that would include Gloria Perez, who was featured just last week, head of the Minnesota Women's Foundation. Paul Williams, who leads Project for Pride in Living and who was a speaker for the Combined Social Justice Forum and Adult Education last May. Adair Mosley, who at the time led the Pillsbury United Communities and has since moved to lead the African American Leadership Forum, and he was a Social Justice Forum speaker last year. Shonda Smith Baker of the Minneapolis Foundation, Ilona Street Stewart, ruling elder of the Synod of Lakes and Prairies and co-moderator of General Assembly. And then we also spoke with leaders in several smaller organizations with a more focused mission, such as Marisa Miakonda Cummings, who is head of the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center, Robert Lilligren, who is at the Native American Community Development Institute, and Ariana Letran Garcia, who is vice president of programs for Comunidades Latina Unidas y Servicio, or CLUS, which serves Hispanic and Latina women and girls. So what did we learn from these conversations? We asked them, if the Twin Cities were racially just, how would it be different from what it is at present? And they talked about how disparities in housing, health, education, employment, and wealth would be eliminated. One said, in different words, life outcomes would not be predictable by race or class or zip code. Structural barriers to individual flourishing would be gone. And my favorite response was from Shonda Smith Baker, who said, we wouldn't even have to ask the question. We also asked them what they saw as the root causes of racial injustice. And they talked about ongoing intergenerational inequities in power and wealth, with unequal access to capital, to household income, affordable housing, systems that aren't set up for all to succeed, and a number of them focused on educational institutions that are not designed to promote the flourishing, particularly of children of color. All of the challenges that our neighbors experience, they all talked about how those challenges were exacerbated by COVID. In some cases, particularly for our Indigenous children and youth, gains that had been made in those communities, such as improvements in graduation rates and in school attendance, were undone to a very significant level, and they weren't catching up the way the rest of the kids in Minneapolis-St. Paul were catching up. And funding for programs that had previously been successful and instrumental in prompting those gains had dried up. So it was kind of a double whammy of promoting continued inequality and inequity. We also asked them for advice for Westminster as we were on this journey of discerning where we could partner and how we could support. The first thing they all said is the need to educate our own community, and so the Social Justice Forum will continue to be a venue where that happens. We were also advised to focus our efforts. The mission component could have been spread with small amounts of gifts to a wide variety of organizations, and we were encouraged instead to focus our efforts and choose a few organizations where the resources could be focused and then have a bigger impact. We were also advised to ensure that we found partners who were doing policy and advocacy work and attempting to address the structural issues that provide one of the root causes of injustice, so that in addition to the direct programming that ameliorates immediate issues, there's the long-term game of changing the systems that create inequities in the first place. And then we were also encouraged to look at the leadership models of the organizations we consider. Who is leading them? Do they reflect the characteristics of the populations that they seek to serve? And how do they engage the communities in shaping their own futures? And here I'll just cite Paul Williams again from last spring, who said, if it's about us but not with us, it's not for us. So that was one of the things that we look for. Okay, next slide. So this led the mission component group to the following conclusion. We wanted to find organizations that were having upstream impacts. In other words, instead of trying to ameliorate problems after they had already become problems, where are some organizations and what is the focus of their work that attempts to prevent problems and inequities in the first place? So that's what we meant by upstream efforts, not just remedying existing inequities, but on seeking to prevent inequities in the first place. And then we also wanted to learn more about efforts to close the educational achievement gap, and to provide leadership development opportunities for Black and Indigenous children and youth. So the population of interest that kept surfacing in the conversations were Black children and youth and Indigenous children and youth. And the leadership development component is a response to what we learned about how important it is for organizations to be led by and engage the communities that they're seeking to serve. We picked these populations in particular because the educational disparities in Minnesota are among some of the widest in the nation, and that the gaps are the widest particularly for our African American and Indigenous children and teens, and as I said, because we knew and understood that COVID had made these worse. We also know that education is one of the best upstream investments a community can make. That was a consistent message from our community leaders. Our friend, Reverend Dr. Alika Galloway, said, we know that when our children are well, our community is well. So we found that very powerful. So then we developed a new set of questions to ask leaders of a number of organizations whose names kept coming to us in these earlier conversations, and to ask them questions that were shaped by what we had learned from those preliminary conversations, and the community leaders themselves were selected because of those prior conversations. So they provided a wealth of information to us in writing, and then we also had follow-up conversations with them as a group. So I'll tell you about that. Next slide. So I wanted to share with you some of the questions that we asked in an effort to learn more about how they do their work. With regard to their leadership, we wanted to know about the extent to which the makeup of the organization's staff and board embodied a commitment to racial justice. We wanted to know how they empower the people that the organization serves. How does it shape their programming? And how does the lived experience of that community affect what they do and how they do it? We wanted to learn something about how they understand their own effectiveness. We asked them for examples of where they had made an impact and how they evaluate their success, how they continue to know what to keep doing and where they might need to make some tweaks. We also wanted to ask them, and we learned about their own efforts at systems change and at advocacy. We wanted to know how are they changing the narrative about the people and the communities that the organization serves. We were also interested in their sustainability and how they were able to persist in the face of challenges, since all of them were doing work that was intrinsically challenging. So we asked, how does your organization develop its goals? How are you employing strategy, creativity, and leveraging resources? What are some of your greatest challenges, and how have you responded to those challenges in the past? We asked about their nimbleness. What contingency plans has the leadership developed? And can you describe a time where you ran into a barrier or a challenge, and then you adjusted what you were doing and met with success? And then finally, with regard to education and engagement, what capacity building opportunities do they offer to the people and the communities that they serve? And how does the organization seek to educate the local community? So very, very rich conversations, and we have pages and pages of inspiring material from the organizations that we selected. Next up. So in April of 2023, we prepared a report based on both the process that we've described to you and key learnings from the organizations that we were recommending. And Westminster approved the sharing of $1.5 million from the capital campaign with 6 organizations working to advance racial and social justice in the Twin Cities. It was a really inspiring evening with session. We had the opportunity, a number of members of our group are also on session, so there was nice overlap there. And one of our youth elders said, I think this is the most important thing Session is going to do this year. It was really great to hear their response. A number of members of Westminster already knew some of these organizations, and the others were organizations that people were eager to learn more about. One other thing that we emphasized with Session and that we're continuing to emphasize as we talk about our mission component work is that we intentionally framed it as a gift, not a grant. We didn't set criteria where, you have to meet these 3 things and then they're not going to report back to us, except in the normal process of communicating via the ongoing relationships that we hope to establish. But this was intentionally framed as gifts that we are entrusting to these leaders that we know will do great things with the resources that we're sharing. Next slide. So key commonalities among the organizations we're going to talk with you about are that all of them are led by African American or Indigenous leaders. All of them invite the children and young people and the communities that they're in to shape the programming, and all of them are engaged in advocacy for system change. So that's a little bit about the process, and now I'm going to turn it over to Vince, who's going to talk about the first three organizations.
Thank you, Joe. I will let you all see the information on the slide and just try to complement that with a quote from the leader of each one of these three organizations. So Kelly Drummer of McGeezy said that we must, quote, think bigger, think larger regarding the pandemic and the education of BIPOC kids, end quote. And she went on to say that with only 8% of Indigenous children in kindergarten through grade 3 in the Minneapolis public schools proficient in reading and math, we are, quote, looking at a 10 to 12 year period of recovery from the pandemic for BIPOC students. Right? And I must tell you, as someone who works in higher education, that is a sobering thought, because where are they coming after K-12, right? So, Division of Indian Work has a track record of programs that have been shown to improve educational outcomes for American Indian youth. And Louise Mattson said that, quote, the positive news is that we have programs and knowledge to change this. We were making progress before COVID and can do it again. And then Liberty Church 21st Century Academy, the quote that inspired me was actually the one that Joe just shared with you. In the words of Reverend Dr. Alika Galloway, we know that when our children are well, our community is also well. Joe, you have the next three.
So some of those organizations may have been familiar to you because they've spoken in the Social Justice Forum, and of course we have the ongoing relationship with Liberty Community Church and its 21st Century Academy. These three are a little less familiar. They were new to us, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what each of them does. 30,000 feet, some of you may have heard the co-founder Vanessa Young, who worked with Kevin Robinson to establish 30,000 feet, was actually interviewed in an NPR. There was like an NPR snip in August about their program. It was really exciting. So they work with African American students in St. Paul and offers programming and technology, after-school programming, and then programming in technology and the arts to break systemic cycles of poverty through creative learning experiences. They serve 100 to 125 elementary school students across more than 20 schools and 100 to 120 teens per year. So the elementary school students are referred by their schools to the program, and many of the teens come to them as it's kind of like a diversion program from the juvenile justice system. So more than half of the teens who receive training and education and internships in their Tech Geeks program are kids who would otherwise be in the juvenile justice system. They've served more than 2,000 students since their founding in 2013. So they offer after-school and summer literacy and reading programs for kids kindergarten through age 5. They have arts residencies to connect aspiring artists with professional teachers. And then their Tech Geeks program provides introductions to computer science through paid technical education and job opportunities. All of the services are provided free of charge, and as well, lunches and transportation are provided, since transportation is often a key barrier to participation in any kind of enrichment program. They have a very engaged process of tracking the individual progress of each child through individual development programs. And they have great data on their website about their effectiveness. There's an average improvement of 64% in the students' GPAs when they participate in this program. Increase of nearly 75% in school attendance, which is a major issue for that population, and lots of improvement in students' social attitudes, interactions, and their self-confidence. Potential uses of Westminster's gifts would be to potentially add a literacy specialist to their staff, offset transportation costs, and purchase books and materials for the programs that they offer. So my quote from Kevin Robinson, one of the things that really stimulated my thinking about the way they do their work is the mutuality and the community engagement that creates success in their program. So he talked about how they advocate with parents to help them build trust in institutions that their kids are involved in, because so often institutions don't serve their children well, and at the same time they advocate with the institutions to help the institutions expand their thinking about new ways of serving kids and youth. And they're also in constant contact with legislators and elected officials. They are a trusted source, and so people come to them for advice on key issues at the legislature. So it kind of ticked all of the boxes that we were trying to learn about in our conversations with these community leaders. Project Diva was another new organization to us. Project Diva International has provided mentoring, career exploration, and leadership development to more than 5,000 Black middle school and high school girls since its launch it was originally launched at Dunwood Academy. They just celebrated their 15th anniversary. Their mission is to guide Black girls to self-discover toward results, to think, to find alignment with their truth, and to be financially successful. They offer programming in 7 different schools in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and 2 southern suburbs, and a community-based club and several industry-based academies that help girls discover potential careers in travel, aviation, finance, the arts, and entrepreneurship. They do one-on-one coaching, small group sessions, and experiential learning through field trips, summer volunteer work, and internships. And one thing that we found really impressive is that many of the mentors that Project Diva engages are girls who were young women who were previously as girls involved in their programming. They've been in existence long enough now that they can continue to recycle, to have that great cycle or have a pipeline of people to work with them. Nita Kellogg, the project's leader, had wonderful stories to share about Project Diva's impact, and she gave an example of one girl. Many of the girls that they serve, she said, are committed to their journeys and therefore move from year to year through multiple years through both middle school and high school. Their one 8th grader, Leanna, had been with them since 3rd grade, and she said she attends all the core sessions and is an aviation club member. She started taking flight lessons this year as a 12-year-old and will be able to build hours in the air while completing her on-the-ground school until she's able to take her private pilot's lesson at 17. And their weekly newsletter, I've been getting it since we started a relationship with them. Their weekly newsletter is a testimony to the rich array of opportunities they provide. Just this summer, a week-long educational trip to Washington, D.C. for their Travel Academy participants. They had a mock trial experience and interviews with Black attorneys and judges at the Hennepin County juvenile courthouse, and a Women Supporting Women Careers in Medicine event where the girls met with women doctors, African-American women doctors, physician assistants, medical assistants, and radiation therapists, as well as people who work in administrative capacities in healthcare. So just a few examples of their programming for just one summer. Project DIVA reports that 99% of their participants graduate from high school. While they're in the program, more than 85% improve their physical health and maintain positive relationships with school staff, and nearly 95% improve their financial literacy, which is a big focus of their program. They are likely to use our gift to help offset a variety of their program expenses. As you can imagine, the kind of programming that they offer is expensive, and so this really helps to provide some support for that. The last one I'll mention is a small program called the We Win Institute. We visited with them at one of their 2 sites at Zion Baptist Church in North Minneapolis. They have been dedicated for more than 25 years to creating academic and social success for all children with an emphasis on African American children. They do literacy enrichment, mentoring, and other educational activities supporting academic, social, and emotional growth and the development of leadership skills. They also work to increase parental involvement in the lives of their children and their children's schools. So there's a variety of after-school programming that they offer as well. In a fashion kind of similar to Project DIVA, it's not unusual for parents who were participants in We Win programming as youngsters themselves to then bring their own children to the program once they have kids. Their leader, Titilayo Bediako, said that currently only 14% of Black Minneapolis public school students are able to read at grade level. And their philosophy is that having access to literature where children see themselves represented in that literature is one of the major strategies for unlocking their love of reading and of education. So one of their big focuses is giving books by Black authors and illustrators to not only to the population that they serve most directly, but they want to make these books available to everybody. So it's a both-and approach that they take in the community. So it's quite likely that the majority of Westminster's gift will go toward funding additional books to then make their way out into the community. Okay. Next slide. So our mission component subcommittee strongly recommends that this be the start, not the end of our relationship with these organizations. And I encourage you to visit their websites. They're amazing organizations with amazing leaders. So this is an opportunity for us to establish long-term and deep relationships with each gift recipient. I want to tie this to when we had a breakfast earlier this summer with all of the leaders of the organization, because although some of them knew one another, many of them, I don't think anybody knew everybody that was in the room. So it was as much an opportunity for them to learn about one another as it was for us to welcome them and to thank them for the work that they are doing. And at that conversation, I shared a particular set of Bible verses that I think really captures what we learned and how we think we are growing as a result of this opportunity. This is from the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verses 23 to 25. And just listen for the themes that we've talked about in this presentation. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for God who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. I love the fact that it starts with hope, which is where we start with the capital campaign, with the campaign. And I intentionally chose the translation from the New Revised Standard Version, anglicized version. I can't believe how many translations there are. But I love the use of the word provoke. There are other translations that talk about stirring up one another to love and good works or encouraging one another, but I kind of like the little edge of provoke. And these organizations are engaged in loving provocation. They want to provoke the people that they serve to engage with them. They are clearly engaged in provoking the larger systems within which they are located. They are engaged in provoking us to think about ways in which we participate and benefit from the very systems that do not serve these populations well. And there's also this phrase about considering one another, which means being present, which means listening. And that too, they listen to the people they serve, and we have the opportunity to listen to them and to be inspired by the way, not just what they do, but how they do it. So that is the verse that I want to leave you with.
Thanks, Joe. To wrap up, I would just want to add to Joe's comments a little bit more about the process that we used and its implications for Westminster's faith and action work going forward. And I want to start by saying that we approached our work with the requisite humility. We recognized that there were already organizations offering effective programming who knew more about their communities and knew more about these issues than we did. We were guided by that statement made by Paul Williams that Joe shared with you earlier, but we were also guided by our own pastor's preaching. And it was great that Joe cited some scripture because it always starts there, but I'd be remiss if I didn't lift up for you all that we were paying attention to what we heard proclaimed in our own pulpit. Specifically, in a sermon titled With God and One Another in February, Reverend Megan cited the example of a community in Ecuador that had a church building built by a visiting group on a mission trip that was never used because the community didn't need a church building. And so in that sermon, Reverend Megan called on us to reimagine the model of Christian service as being not for others, but with others. Service done in relationship with God and with others. And she went on to say that, quote, God blesses relationships that are entered into where both parties expect to experience glory through presence. And she cited our existing global partnerships, specifically our relationship with our Cuban partners. This was in February when we had a group down in Cuba with our Cuba partners, as being, quote, the epitome of being present with others. And she concluded by saying, don't just do something, be with. And so with all of that wisdom from both external and internal sources as our guide, we decided to recommend that Westminster view these 6 gifts as opportunities to establish, or in the case of Liberty Church, expand a long-term and deep relationship with each organization, if that is what the organization desires. So this is a somewhat different approach than the one Westminster took with the recipients of mission component gifts from our last capital campaign, Open Doors, Open Futures. It is a neighbor-centered focus that has the potential to impact not just the mission component of the Enduring Hope campaign, but more broadly, how Westminster understands the term faith in action going forward. And so with that, I think we're ready for your questions or comments.
Thank you. So we'll alternate between in the room and online, and let's start in the room.
I really appreciated what you said about viewing this as a gift and not a grant. And although you didn't say this, I suspect that that means that you did not consider that kind of common looking at what percentage of the budget is overhead versus, programmatic. However, I'm just curious, did you consider financial aspects of the organization, maybe as part of the sustainability, or did you consider budget size and some of those aspects?
I can answer. So yes and no. We did not ask for, I guess I should stand up so we're, we did not ask for budget statements or audits or anything like that, in part because we were relying on what we had heard by taking the community-based approach. We didn't have concerns about they'd been in existence long enough, and they had been recommended to us by these community leaders that we trusted. That said, we did want, and again, based on the advice we had early in our process, we did want to have a variety of organizations that reflected differences in scope and focus. So the first three that Vince introduced were much larger organizations. 30,000 feet is kind of in between, and then Project Diva and We Win are both smaller organizations. So in that sense, it was a little bit like the way you might think about a portfolio. We wanted a mixture in that regard. But no, we did not seek a financial accounting in that regard.
Beth, anything from the live stream? Not right now. Okay.
Do you want to step up here and then we're both in the camera?
Oh,
I was wondering how the girls were chosen for Project Diva. With those numbers, it almost sounded like it was the cream of the crop and not the ones that were most vulnerable. Do you have any idea how they were chosen or how they became in the program?
It is through an application process and a referral process, and I think there is some engagement from the schools that the girls are in as well. So it's in some ways that's similar to how 30,000 feet selects its participants. It's a combination of referral and application. Elena, are you remembering additional details on that?
It is school-based. It is not creaming, but Project Diva would say all girls, without respect to income, need the kind of mentoring and accompaniment to grow into girlhood, especially girls of color. And they found that. So no creaming, but open to all.
So you ended up with 6 organizations. I'm just curious if you started with more than 6, or how did you initially identify a larger number and narrow down to 6, or did you kind of lock in on the 6 pretty quickly?
We didn't start off with a target of 6. We were driven by that guidance that Joe referenced, better to go big with a smaller number of organizations than to spread the money over a larger number of organizations in smaller amounts. So you heard the $1.3 million that we had to work with. We essentially started asking ourselves, what does it look like to make a gift that would be large enough to really make an impact? And how many impact size gifts can you get out of that budget? And that sort of led us to a number in that 5, 6, 7 or so organization range. There were other organizations that we considered that ultimately we settled on these 6.
Anything else on the live stream, Beth? No? Okay.
I want to raise a provocative subject with you.
Well, scripture back to me, will you?
Yeah.
This last week, we had the head of the Women's Foundation at our church, And I notice the DIVA organization is one of your 6. But in American society in general, and especially with minority youth, it's the boys that are in trouble. They are less likely to graduate from high school. They are less likely to go on for further schooling. They are more likely to get into the criminal justice system, which has a lifetime effect upon them most frequently. And I recognize there are fewer organizations working with boys. That's part of the problem. But why are we giving more attention to girls' problems when it seems to be the boys, and this is especially true in the minority communities, that are in the most difficulty, who grow up to be not very good marriage partners?
Well, I'll start and let Joe join in. Stepping back, I don't deny the general statistics that you cited about the disparities for particularly Black African-American boys. I would just point out that of the 6 organizations, the only one that is gender-specific is Project Diva. The other 5 serve both boys and girls. What we also know from our conversations is that the people running these organizations are aware of the very things that you raised. I think you can't spend much more than 10 minutes with Pastor Lika and not have that come through loud and clear. And so even though the 21st Century Leadership Academy is open to boys and girls, they are very much aware of the particular challenges for African American and Black boys, young men in the North Minneapolis community, work intentionally to respond to that. We did, in the course of our conversations, encounter leaders from organizations that we did not end up funding, but that do work with boys and men. One of the ones we were most impressed with was called Black Men Teach, who's their organization. Their focus is very narrow. It's literally to build a pipeline and then increase the number of African American and Black young men who go into education, and particularly K-12 education as a career. For various reasons, we decided not to give a gift to them, but we certainly had conversations with them. We know they exist. They now know we exist. So it's a fair question, but at the end of the day, we just felt like these organizations were directly responsive to what our objectives were, and that we would be addressing that issue, at least indirectly, by funding them.
Yeah, it really is a great question, and the only thing I'll add is to go back to the earlier metaphor of having a mixed portfolio. So, for example, I think 30,000 Feet in its Tech Geeks program probably serves more boys than girls. I'd have to look, but given the selection process, I'm guessing that their population is going to be more likely to be male than female. So, and Project Diva was one of the smaller organizations too. It's not of the scope that the other ones are.
I just want to add, too, that in the African American community, this kind of competition of we can only help Black girls or we can only help Black boys is something that we work very hard to overcome. And just the notion of competition, thankfully, is one of the things that we were alleviated from. We didn't have to kind of have this artificial competition. I will also say that what we know both in the United States and around the world is that when we invest in programs to help women, it uplifts the entire community. But mostly, and also to just for a long time, the underdevelopment of Black women and girls and other women of color, it's been because of that kind of competitive thinking. So I want to provoke the provocative to say, can we think about the generous sower that God is, instead of thinking about this competition of resources? And Eric is signaling that we ought to do our conclusion. It looks like Kathy has a comment. Kathy's got a comment.
Okay. Kathy, you want to go real quick here?
I just would like to, I'd like to know what about the financial sustainability going forward that we will provide or that you envision that we provide to these organizations? Or is this just a one-time gift?
The question was about financial sustainability going forward and Westminster's ongoing financial support. Our task was just to recommend this one-time gift. That having been said, in most instances, we have sat down and worked with these organizations to arrange for the gift to be paid in installments over time. So in fact, there is some essentially long-term funding built into the structure of the gift itself. Part of what we hope will happen, but is beyond the scope of our work, is that deep and long-term relationships, again, think our global partners, will almost by definition bring continued financial support of some kind from Westminster to these organizations.
Well, thank you both, Vince and Joe, for sharing the work of the mission component team. And next Sunday, we welcome you back to hear from Reverend Anna Kindig-Flores, who is anti-racism coordinator for the Presbytery of the Twin Cities area, and Westminster Elder Beth Gillespie will be joining her, and they will be sharing the outcomes of the 2023 self-assessment on race and equity in the Presbytery of the Twin Cities area. We look forward to welcoming you then. Thank you.